I still remember the smile on my mother's face when I showed her the engagement ring. She hugged me tightly. She kissed my forehead and whispered, "If she makes you happy, then she already has my blessing." I believed every word. That night, I called the woman I loved and told her, "My mother can't wait to meet you." Neither of us knew that while I was planning our future, my mother was quietly planning our ending. By the time I discovered what she'd been doing behind our backs, our wedding had already been canceled. The woman I loved no longer trusted me, and my own mother was pretending she had no idea why everything had fallen apart. My name is Kgosiatsa Ledezina. I'm 32 years old, and I work as an aviation safety inspector in Accra. The woman I loved was Nafisa Chikandi, a talented pediatric speech therapist whose kindness could calm even the most frightened child. She was honest, compassionate, and the first person who ever made me believe that love could feel peaceful instead of complicated. My mother, Esi Morapiti, welcomed her with warm smiles, thoughtful gifts, and affectionate words. At least, that's what we saw on the surface. Behind our backs, she was carefully weaving a lie powerful enough to destroy everything we had built together. After 3 beautiful years together, it finally happened. I got down on one knee, held out the ring, and asked Nafisa to spend the rest of her life with me. Tears filled her eyes before she even answered. When she whispered, "Yes," it felt like the whole world had stopped just for us. We hugged each other tightly, laughing and crying at the same time. In that moment, I truly believed our future had already begun. Every dream we had talked about for years suddenly felt real, and nothing seemed capable of standing in our way. The news spread quickly through both families, and everyone celebrated with excitement. Phone calls, hugs, congratulations, and joyful messages filled our days. Our families met to discuss wedding plans, sharing ideas about the ceremony, the guests, the music, and the traditions we wanted to include. Every conversation was full of happiness, and every plan made our wedding day feel closer. It seemed as if everything in our lives was falling perfectly into place. My mother, Esi Morapiti, appeared happier than anyone else. She smiled every time she saw Nafisa and treated her with kindness and warmth. She insisted on helping with every detail of the wedding, saying she wanted her only son's special day to be unforgettable. She volunteered to contact vendors, organize family meetings, and even help choose decorations. Everyone admired her dedication. Friends and relatives praised her, saying how lucky I was to have such a caring mother who welcomed her future daughter-in-law with open arms. Watching them together filled my heart with peace. Nafisa often told me how grateful she was that my mother had accepted her so completely. Seeing the two women laughing together made me believe our family was already growing stronger. I never questioned my mother's kindness because she gave us every reason to trust her. The closer the wedding came, the more confident I became that everything was exactly as it should be. But while we were busy planning flowers, invitations, and the happiest day of our lives, someone else was quietly planning something very different. Behind those warm smiles and loving words, a secret plan had already begun, and none of us had the slightest idea that the greatest threat to our future was sitting beside us at the family table, only a few weeks after our engagement. I noticed something had changed. At first, it was so small that I tried to ignore it. Nafisa, who used to call me every evening with excitement about wedding plans, suddenly became quiet. Our long conversations grew shorter, and the laughter that always filled our calls slowly disappeared. I told myself she was probably just tired from work, but deep inside, something didn't feel right. She started canceling wedding appointments without giving a clear reason. One day she said she wasn't feeling well. Another day she claimed an emergency had come up at the clinic. When I suggested choosing our wedding outfits or discussing our honeymoon, she quickly changed the subject. The woman who once couldn't stop talking about our future now seemed uncomfortable whenever I mentioned it. Every time I looked into her eyes, I saw a sadness she was trying hard to hide. I couldn't understand what had happened. Just weeks earlier, she had been counting down the days until our wedding. Now it felt as if she was slowly pulling away from me without explaining why. I asked her more than once if I had done something wrong. I apologized for things I couldn't even remember doing, hoping it would make her smile again. But she simply shook her head and forced a small smile that never reached her eyes. "It's just stress," she kept saying. Work has been exhausting. Please don't worry. I wanted to believe her because I trusted her completely. But my heart refused to accept that stress alone could change someone so much. I could feel an invisible wall growing between us, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break through it. Some nights she took hours to reply to my messages. Other times she would read them and answer with only a few words. The distance between us wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, slow, and painful. It felt like watching someone you love drift farther away while you stand helpless on the shore. I had no idea what was causing her fear. I only knew that the woman who once dreamed about spending forever with me was suddenly acting as if our future frightened her. And I was desperate to discover why before it was too late. One evening, Nafisa called me and asked if we could meet. Her voice sounded weak, and I could tell she had been crying. The moment I saw her sitting alone at the cafe, my heart sank. Her eyes were red, and she could barely look at me. The warm smile I loved so much was gone. Instead, she looked hurt, confused, and emotionally exhausted. I sat across from her, trying to understand what had happened, but she remained silent for several seconds. Finally, with trembling hands, she picked up her phone and placed it on the table between us. "Please tell me the truth," she whispered. "Did you really send these?" I looked down at the screen and saw several screenshots of text messages. As I began reading them, I felt my stomach twist. The messages were cruel and heartless. They accused Nafisa of staying with me only because of my salary. They insulted her parents, mocked her family's background, and claimed that marrying her would be the biggest mistake of my life. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through each message. They were written exactly the way I normally texted. They even used my favorite expressions and little jokes that only someone close to me would know. It looked so real that even I would have believed they came from my phone. I looked at Nafisa and immediately said, "I swear to you, I never wrote any of these." My voice cracked because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had never spoken about her or her family with anything but love and respect. The thought that she had been carrying this pain alone broke my heart. Tears rolled down her face as she admitted she hadn't wanted to believe the messages at first. But more kept coming over several days. Each one became more insulting than the last. They slowly filled her with doubt, making her wonder if the man she loved had been hiding his true feelings all along. At that moment, I realized this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. Someone had carefully copied the way I spoke, used personal details about our relationship, and created messages that looked frighteningly real. Whoever was behind this wasn't trying to play a joke. They wanted to destroy our relationship, and they were getting dangerously close to succeeding. I refused to let those fake messages destroy everything Nafisa and I had built together. I knew I hadn't written a single word, and I was determined to prove it. This was no longer just about saving our wedding. It was about finding the person who had secretly stepped into our lives and tried to tear us apart. I promised Nafisa that I would uncover the truth, no matter how long it took. The very next day, I contacted an old friend who worked as a digital forensics expert. He had spent years investigating online fraud and identity theft, and I trusted him completely. I handed him every screenshot, every phone number, and every detail Nafisa had received. He carefully examined everything while I waited, hoping he would find something that could clear my name. After several days, he finally called me with the first results. His voice was calm, but what he said made my heart race. The messages had not come from my phone at all. They had been sent from an anonymous prepaid number that had been activated using false information. Whoever bought it had taken great care to hide their identity. This wasn't something done in a moment of anger. It had been carefully planned from the very beginning, but the investigation didn't stop there. As my friend looked deeper, he noticed something even more disturbing. The fake messages included private details about Nafisa and me that almost nobody else knew. Some of the photos attached to the messages had never been posted online. They had been taken during small family gatherings and private celebrations. There were even references to conversations we had only shared with a few close relatives. My friend looked at me seriously and said, "This isn't the work of a stranger. Whoever did this knows both of you very well." Those words echoed in my mind. A complete stranger could never have collected so much personal information. The person behind the fake messages had access to our lives, our memories, and even our private photographs. They had been watching us from much closer than I had ever imagined. As I left my friend's office, I felt a chill run through my body. For the first time, I stopped looking outside my circle for answers. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The person who wanted to destroy my relationship wasn't far away. They had been standing much closer to my family than I ever dared to believe. Few days after the investigation, I still had more questions than answers. I knew the person behind the fake messages had to be someone close to my family, but I had no idea who. My mind kept replaying every conversation, every family gathering, and every small moment that now seemed suspicious. I wanted the truth, even if it was painful. One Saturday afternoon, my mother asked me to help her organize some old boxes and documents in the storage room of her house. It seemed like an ordinary favor, something I had done many times before. We sorted through old photo albums, folders, and dusty files that hadn't been touched in years. While moving one of the boxes, I noticed a small digital voice recorder lying underneath a stack of papers. It looked old, almost forgotten. Out of curiosity, I picked it up and pressed one of the buttons. I expected to hear grocery lists or simple reminders. Instead, a recorded conversation began to play. At first, I didn't pay much attention. But then I heard a voice that made me freeze completely. It was my mother's voice. She was speaking calmly with someone on the phone. A few seconds later, another voice answered. From the conversation, it became clear that the other person was a private investigator she had secretly hired. I stood there in complete shock as I continued listening. My mother wasn't asking about wedding decorations or family matters. She was discussing Nafisa. She said she wanted regular updates about her, where she went, who she met, and how she reacted to the anonymous messages. Then came the words that shattered my heart. "I need her to leave him on her own," my mother said quietly. "If she becomes afraid enough, she'll walk away without knowing I was involved." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then she explained why. She said she believed I deserved to marry a woman from a richer, more powerful, and more influential family. In her mind, Nafisa wasn't good enough for the future she had imagined for me. She admitted that everything she had done was meant to push Nafisa away before the wedding. My hands began to shake so badly that I almost dropped the recorder. The mystery that had haunted me for weeks suddenly disappeared, replaced by a truth far more painful than I could have imagined. The person who had nearly destroyed my future wasn't a stranger. It was my own mother. That evening, I called Nafisa and asked if we could meet somewhere quiet. My voice was so serious that she didn't ask any questions. She simply agreed. We met at the small park where we had shared our very first date 3 years earlier. It had always been a place filled with happy memories, but that day it felt heavy with silence. She looked at me with tired eyes, as if she had been carrying a burden for far too long. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. I reached into my bag and carefully placed the old voice recorder on the bench between us. I looked into her eyes and quietly said, "Before you make any final decision about us, I need you to hear something." She nodded without saying a word. I pressed the play button. The familiar voice filled the silence. My mother's conversation with the private investigator echoed through the park. Every sentence revealed another painful truth. She admitted she had wanted to scare Nafisa into ending our relationship. She believed I deserved someone wealthier, someone with more influence, and she was willing to manipulate us both to make that happen. As the recording ended, Nafisa covered her face with both hands. Tears streamed down her cheeks and her shoulders trembled. She wasn't crying because she no longer loved me. She was crying because she realized someone had carefully planted fear and doubt in her heart until she began questioning the man she trusted most. Through her tears, she looked at me and whispered, "I'm so sorry. I wanted to believe you, but those messages felt so real." I gently held her hands and shook my head. "You don't have to apologize. The lies were designed to fool both of us." For the first time in weeks, we weren't standing on opposite sides of the problem. We were standing together, facing the truth. We talked for hours. We admitted how much pain the deception had caused, but we also realized something important. If we allowed those lies to separate us, then the person behind them would win. By the time the sun began to set, we had made our decision. We would not cancel our wedding because of someone else's manipulation. But we also knew we couldn't pretend nothing had happened. The truth had been hidden long enough. Before we could begin our new life together, everyone in the family would have to hear it. A few days later, Both families gathered at my mother's house to discuss our postponed wedding. Everyone believed we were there to choose a new date and settle the remaining plans. The atmosphere felt strangely tense, but no one knew the real reason for the meeting. Some relatives smiled politely, hoping the difficult weeks were finally behind us. Others quietly wondered why Nafisa and I looked so serious. My mother welcomed everyone as if nothing had happened. She served drinks, greeted our relatives warmly, and even smiled at Nafisa. If I hadn't heard the recording with my own ears, I might have believed she was completely innocent. She acted like a caring mother who only wanted to see her son happy. When everyone finally sat down, I stood up and thanked them for coming. My hands were steady, but my heart was beating faster than ever. I looked around the room at the people who loved us and quietly said, "Before we talk about the wedding, there is something every one of you deserves to hear." The room became completely silent. Without saying another word, I placed the small voice recorder on the table and pressed the play button. My mother's voice filled the room. Every sentence echoed through the silence. She spoke about hiring a private investigator. She admitted she wanted Nafisa to become frightened enough to leave me. She explained that the fake messages were meant to destroy our relationship because she believed I should marry into a wealthier and more influential family. No one moved. No one interrupted. The silence became heavier with every passing second. I looked toward Nafisa's parents. Tears had filled her mother's eyes. Her father lowered his head in disbelief. My uncles and aunts stared at my mother without saying a single word. Even those who had always defended her looked shocked. It was as if nobody could accept that the kind, generous woman they knew had secretly planned something so cruel. When the recording finally ended, the room remained silent. There were no angry arguments, no screaming, no dramatic accusations. The truth itself was louder than any shout could ever be. My mother slowly lowered her eyes, unable to look at anyone. Around her, the disappointment on every face said more than words ever could. In that painful silence, everyone understood the same thing. The greatest threat to our wedding had never come from outside our family. It had been sitting among us all along. For what felt like forever, nobody spoke. The recording had ended, but its words still echoed in every corner of the room. My mother remained seated with her head lowered, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The silence was heavier than any argument could have been. Every family member was waiting for her to say something, anything that could explain what we had all just heard. Finally, she took a slow, shaky breath and stood up. Her hands were trembling, and the confident smile she always wore had completely disappeared. She looked around the room before stopping for a moment to look at me. Tears slowly filled her eyes. In a quiet voice, she said, "Everything you heard is true." Those words broke the silence like thunder. She admitted that she had been the one behind the plan from the very beginning. She confessed that she had convinced herself she was protecting my future. In her heart, she believed I deserved someone from a richer, more powerful, and more influential family. She thought Nafisa, no matter how kind or loving she was, could never give me the life she had imagined. Then her voice began to shake even more. "I told myself I was doing it because I loved my son," she whispered. "But I was wrong." She explained that after my engagement, she had become afraid. She feared that once I got married, I would no longer need her the way I once had. Instead of accepting that my life was changing, she tried to control it. At first, it was only small opinions and quiet suggestions. But those small attempts slowly turned into secret plans. And before she realized it, her desire to protect me had become manipulation, lies, and deception. As she spoke, tears rolled down her face. She looked toward Nafisa with deep regret and quietly said, "You never did anything wrong. I created a battle that never should have existed." No one interrupted her. No one celebrated her confession. There was only sadness, because everyone understood how much damage fear had caused. I looked at my mother and saw someone very different from the strong woman I had always known. For the first time, she wasn't hiding behind excuses or pretending to be right. She was finally facing the truth about herself. And sometimes, admitting your greatest mistake is the first real step toward becoming a better person. The truth finally came out, and the lies that had been keeping us apart were exposed. Nafisa and I no longer questioned each other's love or loyalty. We both understood that we had been caught in a carefully planned deception. The fake messages had created fear between us, but they had never changed what we truly felt for each other. For the first time in many weeks, we could look into each other's eyes without confusion standing between us. But even though the truth had healed the misunderstanding, it could not erase the pain overnight. Trust is like a beautiful glass. Once it is cracked, it can be repaired, but it takes time, care, and patience. We knew we couldn't simply pretend that nothing had happened. The emotional wounds were still fresh, and both of us needed time to heal before beginning a new chapter together. After many long conversations, we made a decision that surprised everyone. We postponed our wedding for several months. Some relatives thought it meant we were having second thoughts. Others assumed our relationship was falling apart. But they couldn't have been more wrong. We weren't delaying the wedding because we doubted each other. We were delaying it because we believed our marriage deserved a stronger foundation than fear and heartbreak. During those months, we spent more time talking than ever before. We shared every fear, every question, and every painful memory that had built up between us. Instead of hiding our emotions, we faced them together. Slowly, the distance that had once separated us disappeared, replaced by honesty, understanding, and even deeper love. My mother also began trying to repair the damage she had caused. She never asked us to forget what had happened. Instead, she accepted responsibility and gave us the space we needed. Her actions became quieter, kinder, and more respectful. She understood that forgiveness could never be demanded. It had to be earned. As the weeks turned into months, peace slowly returned to our lives. The laughter we had lost began to come back. Wedding planning no longer felt stressful or painful. This time, every decision was made with joy instead of fear. Looking back, I realized something important. Sometimes love isn't proven by rushing toward the wedding day. Sometimes love is proven by having the courage to slow down, heal together, and make sure that when you finally say, "I do," there are no lies left standing between your hearts. 1 year later, the day we had once feared would never come finally arrived. The morning of our wedding felt completely different from the first time we had planned it. There was no tension, no uncertainty, and no hidden pain. As I stood getting ready, I looked out the window and smiled. After everything we had survived together, this day was no longer just about a wedding. It was a celebration of trust that had been broken, tested, and carefully rebuilt. Friends and family gathered to witness our marriage, but this time the atmosphere felt peaceful. The people surrounding us were there for one reason only: to support our love with honest hearts. There were no whispered rumors, no uncomfortable looks, and no unanswered questions. Every smile in the room felt real because every secret had already been brought into the light. When Nafisa arrived, she looked more beautiful than I had ever seen her. But it wasn't just her dress or her smile that caught my attention. It was the peace in her eyes. The fear that had once filled her heart had disappeared.